very much. Thanks for coming. I hope you're in the humour for some fiddle music.
Yes.
Because if not, it's going to be a rough couple of hours. So I thought I might give you a little musical tour of the west coast of Ireland. The eastern half of Ireland is a lot closer to England, so over the last few hundred years the English influence has been a lot stronger, and in the west the older traditions have stayed alive a bit longer, and that's where most of the music that I heard when I was growing up, most of it came from the west. So down in the southwest there's an area called Sliabh Luachra, which is Irish for a mountain of reeds or mountain of rushes, which will give you some idea of the type of land they have down there. Not ideal for farming, but fine if you want to sit around playing fiddle tunes. It's an area that was hard to get to, and once you got there, it was hard to be found. So, favourite place for people running away from the authorities. And surprisingly, a lot of those people running away were musicians, and singers and poets and people like that. And to this day, Sliabh Luachra still has a really strong culture of music and dance and singing and poetry, literature. And they have a slightly different repertoire down there. While the rest of the country is busy playing reels and jigs, in Sliabh Luachra they play what are known as polkas and slides. A slide is a kind of a jig, the jig equivalent. So I'll play a few slides for you. And this is the kind of music you might hear if you went to Sliabh Luachra. Well, if you head north from Sliabh Luachra, after a while you'll come to North Kerry, and there's a river there, a big river called the Shannon, and when you cross over the Shannon you're into a place called County Clare, which is another area renowned for its musicians and its music. They have a different style of playing in County Clare, and when I was growing up in London, I was lucky enough to know one of the great Clare fiddlers of his era, a man called Bobby Casey, and through him I got to hear and meet several of the fellas he knew when he was living in Ireland. Fellas like John Kelly, Joe Ryan, Junior Crehan, and a whole bunch of other great fiddlers as well. So I learned a lot of music from those guys, and these three reels are tunes I always associate with the part of Ireland that Bobby came from. It's the nearest town would be Milltown Malbay. So these three tunes were three that those lads used to play a lot around there. The first one, for many years I thought it was called the Turtle, because one night I asked Bobby what's the name of that tune, and Bobby had a tendency to mutter, so he muttered something which I thought was the Turtle. But about 30 years later I found out it was actually named after a person called Tuttle. So if Mr. Tuttle is here this evening, I apologise for calling you a turtle for the last 5 years or so. The second one is called The Bunch of Green Rushes, and the third one is called The Maids of Mitchelstown. we head on north from Clare, we come into County Galway, another area with lots of great music and musicians. Probably the most prominent fiddle player from that area is a guy called Paddy Fahy. Paddy Fahy has a very unique style of playing, and he also has written many tunes that have entered the traditional repertoire. Now this traditional music, by definition, it suggests that it's handed down from one generation to the next. That's what we call traditional, right? But Paddy Fahy and a few more other characters like him, they have a knack of being able to write a tune that is instantly traditional. I don't know how they manage it. Maybe they've got some kind of dispensation from the Pope or something. Somehow they manage to waive the usual 70-year waiting period. They write the tune and it's traditional instantly. Another interesting thing about Paddy Fahy, all his tunes have the same title. They're all called Paddy Fahys. But one of his more famous ones is a jig called Paddy Fahy's Jig that I'll play for you now. And it's, most people associate Irish jigs with very happy, bouncy, jolly kind of music. But the jigs aren't always that way, especially Paddy Fahy's tunes. There's a poignant, wistful side to a lot of them. So I'm going to play his Paddy's jig and another couple that are in the same vein. One is named after a piper, blind itinerant piper called Garrett Barry, and the third one is called the Cliffs of Moher. The Cliffs of Moher are one of Ireland's beauty spots on the west coast. Pretty spectacular looking if you can see them through the rain and mist. They're the highest cliffs in Europe, apparently, the Cliffs of Moher. But the interesting thing is, further up the coast in Donegal, you have another set of cliffs that are the highest cliffs in Ireland. How they manage that, I don't really know. if we head on north another little bit, we come to Roscommon, and this fella that is responsible for the next set of tunes, he also is claimed by the neighbouring county Leitrim. He lived in both places apparently. His name was Turlough O'Carolan, and he was a blind, he went blind as a teenager. And he wasn't sure what to do, and somebody suggested music, so he discovered he had a great talent for playing the harp, and not only for playing music but also for composing music. So from then on, that's how he made his living. He would travel around the west of Ireland visiting the big houses, and he would, in return for hospitality, he would entertain the residents and the friends and neighbours with his music. And after a while, after a couple of weeks, he'd move on to the next house, and that's how he spent his time. And of course, this is, we're talking about the early to mid 1700s. So there was no, in those days, there was no music unless you had a live musician in the room, which, there's advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes it's great to just turn on the iPod and not have to talk to the musician. But in those days, you didn't have that option. So he was a very, people used to get excited when they'd see him coming because they knew there was going to be music in the house for the next while, and they'd usually treat him really well. And in return, he would often write a piece of music in honour of the host or hostess. And these tribute tunes often had the word planksty in the title. I don't know if you have heard that word, but it means tune in honour of, or piece of music in honour of, and then it's followed by a person's name. So Planksty Smith or Planksty Johnson. So a lot of these tunes were known as Planksties because he specifically wrote them for the people that were looking after him. Kind of an interesting character. The time he was doing this was the same time Bach was doing his thing in Austria or Germany or wherever he was from. And the Baroque influence, the Baroque music had been really strong for a while. It was beginning to fade a bit. The style was changing. But O'Carolan somehow picked up on the Baroque style. And I often wondered, how did he get to hear this music? Because there was no records, or you wouldn't be tuning in on the radio to hear what was fashionable in music. But he was often criticised for being a bit too modern. But of course, a lot of the other strong influence was the old Irish Gaelic melodies that he built a lot of his music on. But you can hear that he definitely was aware of what the Baroque musicians were up to. And a lot of music was becoming popular from Italy around the same time. Geminiani and Corelli are two composers I can think of. I'm sure there's a few more. But their music, they were Italians. The music became really popular in Italy and made its way up through Northern Europe and over to Ireland. And the story is that O'Carolan wasn't too thrilled with this Italian music coming into the country. So he wrote a tune that was supposedly a protest against the influx of Italian music. But it backfired on him a bit because it ended up with an Italian title. It became known as O'Carolan's Concerto. It's not a concerto. But I sometimes think that this rivalry was just a complete fake thing. You know how boxers sometimes pretend they hate each other just to hype up the fact that there's going to be a challenge. I think there might have been a bit of that going on, because you read certain reports and they were really good friends, O'Carroll and these other composers. And Dublin was a kind of a fashionable city at the time, so a lot of Europeans would come and a lot of composers would come and perform there and have their music played there. In fact, I think Handel's Messiah, the first time it was ever performed, was in Dublin, I think. So that's probably how he was hearing this more fashionable music, and that's how he was able to field these criticisms of being a bit too modern. Anyway, I'm going to play the concerto for you, even though it's not a concerto, and another tune that he wrote for some friends of his up in Sligo. They had a new baby, and to celebrate the birth of the child, he wrote this piece in honour of the new baby, called Loftus Jones. Well, both Roscommon and Leitrim border the county that my family's from, a place called Sligo. And Sligo is renowned for its music and musicians, especially fiddle players, but also flute players. And the fiddle players came to prominence in the early 1900s because a bunch of lads left Ireland, left Sligo. I don't think there was any kind of a plan, it was just they were looking for work and they emigrated to New York. They didn't come as a group or anything, but they all played the fiddle and they were all really good. There was a whole gang of them that were really good and all from that same area. And when they got to New York, it was around the time of the birth of the recording industry. And the record companies realised there were a lot of people coming in from Ireland as well as other places. So there was a market for Irish music on this new-fangled technology called the record player. So they got some of the more prominent musicians to make some records. And the best guys around, just by coincidence, seemed to be these fiddle players who all came from Sligo. There was a guy called Michael Coleman, who's probably the most famous of them. A fellow called Paddy, a guy called George White, a guy called Paddy Sweeney, James Morrison. There's probably a whole bunch more, lesser known, but all playing that similar style of music. It's brisk and, you know, it's quite up-tempo and highly ornamented. And when those records came back to Ireland, not only were they excited about the new technology, but they got really excited to hear their own kind of music being played on these records. But also they were a bit taken aback at the skill of these musicians, and they all came from Sligo. So Sligo developed this reputation through that handful of fiddle players for being the kind of home of Irish fiddle music. And I always think it's very ironic because if those guys had stayed in Sligo, they would probably have never been heard of outside their own locality. But because they left and made these records, they became really influential all over Ireland. And to this day, those recordings from the 20s and 30s are still a big influence on why a lot of people play. So that's where I grew up, or that's where my parents grew up. I grew up in London, but I grew up with a steady diet of Sligo music because all their friends and relations would come to the house and play, and they were all steeped in this same kind of music. My grandfather played, my father's father. He didn't play very well, but my father's aunt, like his mother's sister, was a really good player. My mother had an uncle who was a great player. So it was all over the place, you know. But one of the guys who didn't come to America, he came to London instead. There's a guy called Michael Gorman, who I think was a distant relation to my mother's. But he wrote a few tunes that became very popular. I'm going to play one of them now. It's a slip jig that I recorded years ago with a man, some of you know, a great guitar player and singer called Mícheál Ó Domhnaill. We used to play together in a group called the Fahy Band, and then we came to this country together playing as a duet. And we did a record named after this tune, the Promenade it's called. Like I said, it's a slip jig. So I'm going to include the only tune that I learnt from my grandfather, which was another slip jig called The Boys of Ballisodare. So here we go. probably my spiritual and cultural home. My present home, my physical home, is a place called Portland, Oregon. I've been living there for 30 years or more, 35 years. So I should probably play a piece of music from Oregon. Not that it sounds like it's from Oregon, but then what does? I don't know if you've noticed, but at music sessions and music gatherings, one of the things that you hardly ever hear is let's play some of those old Oregon tunes. But nonetheless, this next piece of music is from just outside Portland, Oregon, written by a great musician, good friend of mine, a man called Cal Scott. We've done a few recordings together. And this is a tune that he wrote in the style of the musette music that was really popular in France in the 20s and 30s. It was a time when a lot of music, a lot of different styles of music came together, mainly around Paris. The music from North Africa, Eastern Europe, the rural music from provincial France, you know, like happened in lots of places. People were leaving the countryside and moving into the cities. And they all brought their music with them. And this young upstart from America was beginning to show up as well, this thing called jazz. So all these different styles of music got mixed up together, and this new style that they've referred to as musette began. Musette used to be a word meaning the instrument that it was played on, but then it became representative of the style of music. Something that I thought was interesting, I don't know if you find it interesting, but I'll let you know anyway. Something similar happened with the fiddle. The German word for fiddle is Geiger. And or it used to be, I don't know if it still is, but when that word made its way into France, the first G got softened and it became something like giga. And when that word arrived in Ireland, it no longer meant the instrument, it meant the kind of music that was played on the instrument, and that's where the word jig came from. So, how about that? See, you learn something even if you don't want to. So this tune, it's a waltz, it's called Paris Nights. It was written by Cal Scott, as I mentioned, and it sounds exactly like this. And I always think those opening notes right away sound French. was thinking I'd play another set of tunes and then we can have a break for a few minutes. Haven't quite finished our musical tour up the west coast of Ireland yet. There's one more county. If you carry on north from Sligo, there's a great place up there called Donegal, which is the most northerly part of the island, but it's actually in the south. Geographically it's the most northerly, but politically it's in the south. It's kind of another quirky little footnote. The most northerly part of Ireland is in the south. But again, lots of great music up in Donegal. This tune is called something that I can't remember. But it has a beautiful name, I'm sure. And I should know it. I mean, I do know it. It's just, I'm not telling you. Google it. Google it. You don't Google it. You're old enough now to know how to use Google. And then I'll play another couple of tunes. We'll hop back down to Sligo for the last couple of tunes. I learned this from a distant family relative man called John Stenson. 2 reels that I just know as John Stenson's reels. So I play these for you, and then we'll have a bit of a break. And as you probably know, Christmas is almost here, which is why I brought the CDs along. You can get all your Christmas shopping done this evening, and then just think how smug you can feel for the rest of the year, having accomplished that most tiresome of chores in such a timely fashion. If you have friends who like this kind of music, you can bring them a CD, and if you have enemies who don't like this kind of music, even better.